Frank watched everything he owned go up in flames, his truck, his memories, his future, burning on the side of a lonely desert highway. At 53, with nothing left but ashes and debt, he thought his journey was over. But just days later, a message from Keanu Reeves changed everything. And what followed stunned the entire country. Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. The Arizona desert stretched endlessly in front of Frank Salazar as his 2009 Peterbilt rumbled along Interstate 10. At 53, Frank had spent most of his life behind the wheel, learning every mile of highway by heart. The road had shaped him through loss, hardship, and the small victories that only a long-haul trucker truly understood. The morning sun hung low over the horizon, casting warm orange light over the asphalt and the open desert. Saguaros stood like silent guardians along the distant ridges. Heat shimmered from the road so early in the day that Frank knew it would be a scorcher long before noon. But he kept driving, feeling the familiar hum beneath him as if the truck were an extension of his own body. He rested one calloused hand on the steering wheel and glanced at the dashboard where a handful of memories lived. A faded photo of his late wife Maria taken before her illness. A laminated drawing from his daughter Elena when she was 7 years old, showing Frank's truck drawn in bright crayon colors. A small St. Jude medal that had belonged to his mother. These were more than keepsakes. They were pieces of a life that had carried him through lonely nights and endless miles. His truck was not just a machine, it was home. Frank sipped from his thermos, swallowed the bitter taste of black coffee, and released a long breath. He was headed toward Tucson with a refrigerated load of produce, one of the steady routes he had relied on for years to keep up with bills. He had promised Elena he would try to be home for her birthday this year. It was a promise he wanted to keep more than anything. Last year he missed it because a blown tire left him stuck outside El Paso. The year before, a brake line failure kept him stranded in a repair yard. Elena never complained. She loved her father, understood the life he lived, and knew he worked the road to support her and her daughter. But Frank carried guilt for every missed moment. As he drove, he listened to the low hum of the engine. It was a sound he usually found comforting. Today, though, something felt different. A faint tapping noise thumped beneath the hood. He had heard it a few times over the past week. At first, it was subtle, easy to ignore, but now it had grown into a steady knock. Money had been tight, and he had already postponed basic maintenance longer than he should have. He tried to tell himself it would hold together for one more haul, just a few more hours, just long enough to finish the run and get back to Phoenix. Still beneath his calm breathing, he carried a small, growing knot of worry. He lowered the volume of the radio to listen more closely. The knocking picked up again, rhythmic, sharp, mechanical in all the wrong ways. Frank adjusted his grip on the wheel. He had been on the road long enough to know when an engine was trying to tell him something. He reached down and gave the dashboard a reassuring tap, like comforting an old friend. "Come on, girl. Not today." The desert wind gusted across the highway as the truck pushed steadily forward. Frank kept glancing at the temperature gauge. It sat a little higher than he liked, but not yet in the danger zone. Still manageable, still drivable. He took another breath and tried to settle the uneasy feeling in his chest. He had weathered worse before, and every mile that passed was 1 mile closer to Tucson, 1 mile closer to his daughter, 1 mile closer to a promise he wanted to keep. The temperature gauge climbed another notch as Frank approached a long stretch where the desert dropped away into a wide open basin. The air shimmered with heat. The asphalt glowed beneath the rising sun. Frank shifted in his seat, leaning forward a little, listening, waiting. The engine answered him with a louder knock, a metallic clatter that no experienced trucker could mistake. Something was failing. Something deep inside the machine was giving way one heartbeat at a time. Frank released a slow breath through his nose. He had pushed this truck harder than he should have asked more of it than was fair. It had carried him across tens of thousands of miles, through storms and breakdowns, through the worst years of his life when he lost Maria and nearly lost himself in grief. This truck had been his escape then. The open road was the only place where the pain felt manageable. He kept the wheels turning, so the ache inside him never had time to settle. Now, the machine that had carried him through that darkness was struggling. Frank reached over and brushed his fingers against the photo of Maria. She always smiled in that picture. Gentle eyes, warm expression, a softness he still missed even after a decade without her. He whispered quietly under his breath, "Almost there. Just help me get to Tucson." He eased off the accelerator, hoping a lighter touch would ease the strain, but the knocking grew sharper. The temperature gauge pushed higher. A faint smell of overheated metal seeped into the cab, subtle at first, then unmistakable. Frank steadied the wheel. He had been on highways long enough to know when danger was coming. Then, without warning, a warning light flashed on the dashboard. Another followed, then another. A sudden jolt shuddered through the entire front end of the truck. The engine coughed once, twice, then seized with a violent shudder that rippled through the cab. Frank felt the whole rig lurch as he lost power. No, not now. Smoke began to slip up from the edges of the hood, thin at first, a faint white haze drifting upward. Frank's pulse accelerated. He flipped on his hazard lights and checked the mirrors. The highway behind him was clear enough for an emergency stop. He guided the truck toward the shoulder, the steering feeling heavier as the engine lost its fight. The smoke thickened from white to gray. The smell sharpened into something dangerous. Frank gritted his teeth and kept the truck as steady as he could while it limped to the roadside. The cab jittered like a dying animal. He pulled the parking brake the second the front tires touched the gravel. Then the flames appeared. At first, just a flicker beneath the hood, a brief orange lick around the metal seam. A few seconds later, the flames multiplied, spreading like wildfire beneath the engine compartment. Heat washed over the windshield as the fire intensified. Frank's instincts kicked in. He grabbed his phone, wallet, logbook, and a small pouch where he kept Maria's ring. He flung open the door and jumped down to the gravel, stumbling before catching his balance. The heat hit him instantly, dry and brutal against his face. The engine roared with flames now cracking and popping as fire burst upward from beneath the hood. Black smoke spiraled into the sky, thickening fast. Drivers on the highway slowed, some honking in alarm, others filming as they passed. Frank backed away farther, his heart pounding, unable to do anything but watch. His life's work, his freedom, his memories, everything he had built since his wife died was burning right in front of him. And he could not stop it. The fire spread faster than Frank could comprehend. Within minutes, the entire front of the truck was engulfed flames curling up the sides of the cab he had called home for 15 years. The heat became unbearable, forcing him farther back until he stood on the edge of the gravel shoulder, helpless and shaking. He watched the St. Jude medal melt into the dashboard. He watched Maria's photo blacken and curl. He watched Elena's childhood drawing disintegrate into ash, carried off by the desert wind. Sirens wailed in the distance, but the fire was already winning. By the time the fire crew arrived and doused the last burning metal, nothing recognizable remained. The truck's frame sagged like a broken skeleton. Smoke drifted upward into the vast Arizona sky, carrying with it the last pieces of the life Frank had built. A firefighter approached him and asked if he was hurt. Frank could only shake his head. His throat felt tight. His hands trembled. Pain washed over him not from injury, but from loss so total it hollowed him out. His truck was gone. His memories were gone. His livelihood was gone, and standing alone beside the highway, Frank realized his entire world had just burned to the ground. Long before Frank Salazar watched his truck burn on the side of the highway, he had built a life shaped entirely by duty, sacrifice, and the stubborn strength of a man who refused to quit. His story did not begin on open roads or in crowded truck stops. It began in a small one-story home on the outskirts of Phoenix, where he and his wife Maria raised their daughter Elena. Back then, Frank worked long shifts hauling freight across the Southwest. His hands were always rough, his face always sunburned, and his back always tired, but he never minded the work. He believed providing for his family was the greatest purpose a man could have. Maria used to tease him that he loved his truck almost as much as he loved her. He always laughed and said the truck kept the lights on while she kept his heart alive. She was gentle and warm, with bright eyes that never seemed to dim, not even after her diagnosis. Cancer came like a thief in the night, stealing her strength little by little. Frank remembered every detail of those months: the hospital rooms, the whispered prayers, the nights he drove back from a long haul and sat beside her bed until sunrise, afraid to fall asleep in case she needed him. When Maria passed, the world felt heavier. The house felt empty. Elena was only 15, and it broke Frank's heart to watch her cry into his chest, begging to know why her mother had to go. Frank did not have the answers she wanted. He had only his arms to hold her and the road to keep him steady. Some men drown in grief. Frank climbed into his truck and worked as if every mile would keep his daughter safe. He took longer routes, tougher schedules, and back-to-back hauls that kept him awake for 20-hour stretches. He stopped eating full meals just to make deadlines. He slept in rest stops and parking lots because it saved money. For 3 straight years, he pushed himself beyond exhaustion, fueled by coffee determination and the belief that if he worked hard enough, he could build a future for Elena that Maria would have been proud of. Truckers who met him during those years remembered a quiet man with kind eyes and a weary smile who never complained. He turned down charity, he refused handouts, he helped other drivers fix broken hoses and replace blown tires, even when he was behind schedule. Hardship never hardened him. If anything, it softened him in the right ways. He knew what loss felt like, and he never wanted anyone else to feel alone. Elena grew into a determined young woman who studied harder than anyone expected. She wanted to become a nurse because she remembered the compassion shown to her mother during the final months. Frank supported her in every way he could. He sold old tools, he skipped repairs on the truck until the last minute. He drove dangerous routes for higher pay. Whatever it took, he found a way. When Elena walked across the stage at her nursing school graduation, Frank stood in the back of the auditorium in his cleanest shirt and boots, polished just enough to shine. He clapped until his hands hurt. Later that night, Elena hugged him and said she could not have done it without him. Frank only replied with a soft smile. This was the life he had worked for. This was the reason he got up every morning, even when his heart felt too tired to beat. After Elena graduated, life did not slow down for Frank. If anything, the road demanded even more from him. He was a widower raising a daughter, but he never let Elena see how hard things truly were. He shouldered the burden quietly, believing that protecting her meant hiding the struggle. He continued driving long hauls that took him across state lines for weeks at a time. Nevada, Utah, Colorado, New Mexico, back to Arizona. The rhythm of the road became his way of keeping the past at bay. Frank often said the highway had a pulse of its own. When he drove at night with the windows cracked open and the desert air rushing in, he felt closer to Maria. Sometimes he whispers to her, telling her about Elena's classes or how proud he was when their daughter got her first nursing job. It was his way of keeping her memory alive. Some truckers listened to the radio to pass time. Frank listened to the silence, to the rumble of the engine, to the memories that rose and fell like waves. Money was still tight, but Elena's new job eased some of the pressure. She visited whenever Frank passed through Phoenix. Sometimes she brought him food packed neatly in containers with handwritten labels. She always worried he was not eating enough on the road. Frank pretended to complain, but he always saved her meals for last because they tasted like home. When Elena became a mother herself, Frank cried quietly in his truck the first time he held his granddaughter. He felt Maria's spirit in that moment, as if she were standing beside him, whispering that he had done well. But despite the joy, Frank's life remained tied to the road. He rarely took days off. He never took vacations. He turned down holidays in favor of extra pay. Truck stops became more familiar than his own kitchen. Some years he spent more nights parked beneath desert stars than he did in his own bed. Other drivers teased him, saying he lived in that truck more than any man they knew. Frank just smiled and said he liked the quiet. The truth was simpler. The truck was the only place where he did not feel alone. He kept the rig running with determination and stubborn skill. When a hose burst, he fixed it with spare parts and ingenuity. When the transmission rattled, he adjusted it himself. He crawled beneath the truck in rain and heat, cutting his knuckles and bruising his hands, but he never complained. He had taught himself nearly everything by trial and error. And even when the truck began to show its age, he refused to give up on it. He believed if he pushed hard enough, he could keep it alive for a few more years. Frank knew he should have traded up long ago, but every time he considered it, the sight of the loan papers or the interest rates sent him right back to the road. He would rather work harder than owe more. He had spent his life being self-reliant, and he took pride in that. Pride, however, came with a cost. Around the same time, Elena began balancing motherhood with long nursing shifts. Frank's health started to show signs of wear. His shoulders ached. His back tightened after long drives. He woke up stiff from sleeping in the cab. He ignored it all. Pain was easier to manage than debt. Pain was something he could control. Even so, as the years passed, the truck became more than a vehicle, and it became his refuge. The seat molded perfectly to his frame. The dashboard lights felt comforting after sunset. The hum of the engine lulled him to sleep on lonely nights. He had built a life on wheels, and he carried that life with him wherever he went. It never occurred to him that one day it could all vanish in a matter of minutes. As the years rolled on, Frank grew used to living with the sacrifices he had made. He settled into a rhythm that blended routine with quiet resilience. The truck carried his memories. The road carried his purpose. And Elena carried the future he had worked so hard to give her. He never asked for more. He never imagined more. He believed his life would continue this way until he was too old to drive, and even then he hoped to retire with enough saved to leave something for his daughter and granddaughter. The truth he never admitted even to himself was simple. The truck kept him alive after Maria died. Without it, he feared he would have collapsed under the weight of grief and responsibility. The long nights helped him think. The endless miles helped him heal. Every sunrise through the windshield reminded him that he had survived another day, that he could keep going for the people who depended on him. He had not taken a real vacation in more than 20 years, yet he never once complained. Hard work gave him meaning. Love gave him strength, and the road gave him freedom. Until the morning when the fire took it all away. In the weeks leading up to the fire, Frank Salazar lived inside a pressure he never voiced aloud. The truck had begun showing signs of age that even his stubbornness could not ignore. The engine knock that started as an occasional vibration had grown into a regular visitor. The temperature gauge ran hotter than usual on long climbs. The transmission slipped once on a delivery near Yuma, frightening him enough to pull over and check every hose and bolt twice. He knew what these signs meant. A major repair was coming, one he could not afford. Still, he pressed on. He always pressed on. Because life did not pause for breakdowns, and bills did not wait for miracles. Frank had fallen behind on payments more than once that year. Diesel prices had risen. Freight rates had dropped. Elena's ex-husband stopped paying child support, forcing her to rely on extra nursing shifts. Frank tried to help when he could, sliding a few folded bills into her purse when she was not looking or paying for groceries before she had the chance. Every dollar he handed away was a dollar he needed for repairs, but he never hesitated. Elena had carried her own burdens since she was a teenager. Frank refused to add to them. He also refused to tell her how bad things were. She believed he was doing well. She believed his trucking business was still steady. She believed he was saving money, and Frank let her believe all of that because the truth would only worry her. He insisted he was fine even when he skipped meals at truck stops to stretch his cash farther. He drank free refills of coffee and ate crackers he kept in the glove compartment. Nights were spent in the sleeper with the lights off to save power. Everything became a calculation. Everything became a trade-off. Then came the promise. Elena had called him one evening while he was parked outside a distribution center in El Paso. Her voice carried a tired warmth, the sound of someone juggling motherhood and long shifts with unshaken determination. She told him her daughter was performing in her school play the following week. It was the girl's first time on a stage. She begged Frank to be there, saying it would mean everything if he could sit in the audience and cheer her on. The next day would be Elena's birthday, and she hoped he might stay long enough for a small family dinner. Frank did not hesitate. He promised her he would come home. He promised he would be there for both moments. He promised with the full weight of a father who had missed too many milestones. After the call, he leaned back in the driver's seat and closed his eyes. He wanted to keep that promise more than any other promise he had ever made. But the numbers on his notepad, scribbled in tired handwriting, told a different story. The mortgage was due. The insurance invoice was late. The loan on the truck hovered like a shadow over everything. And the engine problem he kept ignoring was becoming too obvious to dismiss. Still, he climbed into the driver's seat the next morning and told himself he could manage one more route. Just one. Enough to get through the week. Enough to see his daughter smile and hear his granddaughter speak her lines on that little school stage. That promise carried him onto the highway. Frank pushed the truck harder than he ever should have as the days went by. Every mile felt like a negotiation with fate. He drove with one eye on the road and the other on the dashboard, watching the gauges rise and fall with unsettling irregularities. Some days the engine sounded normal, steady, and familiar. Other days it coughed during climbs or rattled in the heat. Frank adjusted his driving style to ease the strain, shifting earlier, slowing on hills and avoiding full throttle whenever possible. But the truth sat heavy in the back of his mind. Machines did not heal themselves, not at this age. He considered taking the truck to a mechanic outside Tucson when he passed through earlier that month. He even pulled into the lot and sat there for several long minutes, staring at the rows of vehicles lifted on steel arms. But the estimate for the last major repair still haunted him, and he was behind enough already. He could not risk another bill he could not pay, so he drove on, convincing himself he could squeeze out a little more time, just enough to make it home for Elena, just enough to deliver the load and collect the paycheck. On one long stretch through the desert, he reached for the small pouch he kept in the glove compartment. Inside was Maria's wedding ring, the only piece of jewelry he kept with him. He always touched it before making difficult decisions. This time, he held it between his fingers and closed his eyes for a moment. The cool metal steadied him. He whispered a quiet hope that things would hold together long enough to fulfill the promise he made to Elena and her daughter. Sleep became a luxury during those days. He dozed in short bursts at truck stops or rest areas, waking with stiff joints and an uneasy feeling he could not shake. A few times he dreamed of Maria standing beside the truck, warning him in ways he could not quite understand. He shook off the dreams each morning, telling himself they were only a symptom of exhaustion. Frank's dispatcher, an old friend named Russ, called him midweek to offer another route. The company needed someone reliable, he said, someone who could cover a high-priority shipment. Frank almost accepted out of habit. Years of hard work had conditioned him never to turn down a route, but this time he forced himself to say no. He explained he had promised his daughter he would be home. Russ paused, surprised. Frank never turned down work, not once in all the years he had known him. Finally, Russ told him to drive safe and hung up. Frank stared at the phone for a long moment afterward. The call reminded him how much he had sacrificed to keep his business afloat, to keep his family supported, and to keep the memory of Maria alive through the miles. His granddaughter called next, her small voice filled with excitement. She asked if he would really be there to watch her perform. Frank felt his throat tighten. He assured her he would not miss it for anything in the world. Just hearing her voice made the long hours feel lighter. He ended the call with renewed determination. He would reach Tucson, deliver the load, and then head home. He had a plan. He had a promise. But he also had an engine that was failing quietly beneath his feet. Frank was only a few hours from Tucson on the morning everything unraveled. He woke before sunrise in a small rest area, his body aching from another night curled in the sleeper. He splashed water on his face in the bathroom sink, trying to shake off the fatigue that clung to him like dust. The promise he made to Elena echoed in his mind. The birthday, the school play, the dinner she had been planning for weeks. Every mile he drove felt like a step toward redemption for all the moments he had missed in the past. He climbed into the cab and rubbed the worn steering wheel, a silent gesture of encouragement for both himself and the machine that carried him. The engine struggled to start, coughing twice before rumbling awake. Frank exhaled slowly. It was not a good sign, but it was a start. He eased the truck onto the highway and tried to ignore the uneasy rattle beneath the hood. As the sun rose over the desert, the heat intensified quickly. The knocking grew louder. The temperature gauge began creeping upward. Frank tightened his jaw and kept driving, repeating the same quiet prayer that had carried him through every hard year of his life. Just hold on. Just a little longer. Let me keep my promise. Then the gauge spiked. Warning lights blinked across the dashboard. A metallic snap echoed through the cab. Frank felt the engine shudder as if something vital had broken loose inside it, and within moments, smoke curled from the edges of the hood. His breath caught in his throat. He reached for the wheel with both hands, steering instinctively toward the shoulder. By the time the flames erupted, Frank already knew the truth. His promise was slipping away in front of him, swallowed by fire. The hours after the fire passed in a blur for Frank Salazar. He remembered the smoke curling up into the sky. He remembered the firefighters' boots splashing through puddles of blackened water. He remembered standing in the gravel, as if rooted to the ground, unable to move or speak. But once the flames were extinguished and the wreckage cooled, there was nowhere left for him to go except forward, even if forward felt like falling. A tow truck hauled away what remained of his livelihood. Frank rode in the passenger seat of a sheriff's cruiser that offered him a lift to the nearest town. The deputy tried making small talk, asked if Frank had family nearby or someone he could call. Frank simply shook his head. His voice felt locked behind a wall of exhaustion and disbelief. He kept staring out the window at the desert landscape rolling past, as if looking for something familiar. But everything looked different. The fire had taken more than metal. It had taken something inside him. The sheriff dropped him at a run-down motel just outside Tucson. The sign flickered with a buzzing light, its paint peeling from years under the desert sun. Frank walked inside, his steps heavy, his clothes smelling faintly of smoke. The clerk behind the counter barely looked up as he slid a room key toward him. The room was cheap, but it was all Frank could afford. Inside, the motel room felt small and worn. The curtains hung crooked. The carpet was thin in the center where countless travelers had walked before him. The air conditioner rattled loudly, doing little to push away the stale heat trapped in the walls. Frank set his bag down on the chair and sat at the edge of the bed. For the first time that day, he allowed himself to breathe out fully. It came out shaky, uneven. He told himself he should start making calls. Insurance, the loan office, his dispatcher, anyone who could help piece together the remains of his work. But his hands refused to move. His mind felt scattered, drifting from thought to thought like debris carried by the wind. He pressed his palms to his face and tried to gather himself. His phone rang. The screen lit up with Elena's name. He stared at it for several seconds before answering. Her voice on the other end was bright, full of the usual warmth. She asked if he was on schedule. She asked when he expected to reach Phoenix. She asked if he was excited to see the school play. Frank swallowed hard. His heart squeezed painfully in his chest. He could have told her everything. The fire, the loss, the truth that he had no idea what came next. But he heard her granddaughter laughing in the background, and the thought of adding more weight to Elena's already heavy life felt unbearable. "Just handling paperwork," he said. "Everything's fine. I will call you tomorrow." He hated how easily the lie left his mouth. He ended the call quickly before his voice could betray him. When the silence returned, the room felt even smaller than before. He rested his elbows on his knees and stared at the carpet until the patterns blurred into nothing. A day ago, he had a truck. He had a plan. He had a promise to keep. Now, he had none of those things. Frank sat alone in the motel room for what felt like hours. The muted hum of traffic outside drifted through the thin walls, blending with the occasional thump from someone moving upstairs. The noises reminded him of life, continuing beyond the room. People driving, working, laughing, sleeping. Everyone else kept moving forward while he remained stuck in a pocket of quiet despair. He opened the laptop he kept in his bag and stared at the blank screen until the cursor seemed to pulse with impatience. He forced himself to check his email. His dispatcher, Russ, had sent a message expressing concern about the delayed delivery and asking if everything was all right. Another email arrived from the client politely but firmly demanding an update. Frank closed the laptop before the weight of responsibility became too much to bear. He paced the narrow room, rubbing his hands together as if trying to generate warmth in the cool, stale air. He felt the exhaustion settle deep into his bones. His throat tightened each time he tried to imagine what tomorrow might bring. Without a truck, he had no income. Without income, the loan would swallow any remaining savings he had. The insurance payout whenever it arrived would barely cover a fraction of what he owed. He sat down again, hands trembling slightly. For the first time in years, he considered what it would mean to quit, to walk away from trucking altogether, to accept defeat. But that idea struck him harder than the fire itself. The road had been his life for decades. The rhythm of long miles was stitched into who he was. To give that up felt like losing himself entirely. A soft knock interrupted the silence. Frank looked up, uncertain if he had imagined the sound. The knock came again, louder this time. When he opened the door, he saw a familiar face standing under the dull yellow porch light. It was Red, a fellow trucker he had crossed paths with many times over the years. Red was in his late 60s, heavy-set, with a weathered face and a beard the color of rusty snow. He always wore an old cap with a faded trucking logo on it, the brim bent from years of use. He held a paper bag and a styrofoam container in one hand. "Heard what happened," Red said quietly. "Thought you could use a hot meal." Frank blinked, surprised to see him. He stepped aside to let Red in. They settled at the small round table near the window. Red opened the container and steam rose from a hearty serving of roast beef, potatoes, and vegetables. The scent filled the room instantly. "You did not have to do this," Frank said, his voice rough with fatigue. Red shrugged. "We have all had our bad days out there. Some worse than others. A man should not eat alone when he is hurting." Frank tried to smile, but the weight in his chest made it difficult. He picked up a fork and ate slowly, the warm food easing some of the tightness in his stomach. Red watched him with quiet understanding. "Insurance giving you trouble, son." Frank nodded. "Loan too. Truck is gone. I have nothing left to fall back on. Elena has enough on her plate. I cannot put this on her." Red leaned back, folding his arms. Pride can feed a man's dignity, but it cannot fill his belly. Sometimes you have to let someone in. Frank looked down, unwilling to meet Red's eyes. Pride had kept him upright for years. Now it felt like it was crushing him from the inside. Red stayed a while longer, talking about old routes, rough winters, and close calls on icy highways. He kept the stories light, hoping to draw Frank out of the fog he had sunk into. Frank listened, nodding occasionally, but his thoughts drifted again and again to the burned shell of his truck. Every memory that had lived in that cab felt fragile, now scattered in the ashes on the side of the highway. When Red finally stood to leave, he placed a firm hand on Frank's shoulder. "You are not alone," he said. "The road has taken plenty from all of us, but it also gives back when you least expect it." Frank nodded, trying to accept the comfort, though it felt distant and unreal. Red walked to the door, paused, and looked back. "Call me if you need anything. I mean that." After the door closed, the room fell silent again. Frank finished the last bite of the warm meal, then set the container aside and sat with his head bowed. The kindness had touched him more deeply than he wanted to admit, but it also made the reality sharper. A meal could not fix his situation. A conversation could not undo the fire. Tomorrow he would still be without a truck, without income, and without a clear path forward. He lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling as the air conditioner rattled in the corner. The weight of failure pressed down on him, heavier than the long days he had worked and the sleepless nights he had endured. He thought of Elena. He thought of his granddaughter's school play. He thought of the promise he had broken before he even had the chance to try. And for the first time in many years, Frank felt truly lost. Frank Salazar did not sleep that night. He lay on the creaking motel bed, staring at the dark ceiling while the air conditioner rattled endlessly in the corner. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the truck engulfed in flames, the orange glow swallowing the memories he had carried for years. His heartbeat thudded in his ears, and he kept replaying the moment he stepped away from the burning cab, powerless to stop it. The room felt unbearably quiet. Too quiet for a man whose life had always been filled with noise. The hum of an engine, the wind hitting the windows, the chatter of truck stops late at night. Even loneliness had a rhythm out on the highway. But here in the cramped motel room, the silence only magnified the ache in his chest. By the time the clock on the nightstand blinked 3 a.m., Frank could no longer lie still. He swung his legs over the edge of the bed and rubbed his hands over his face. He needed to let something out. Not a cry, not a plea, just a pressure valve releasing before his thoughts crushed him. He reached for his phone on the table and hesitated, unsure why he even picked it up. His thumb hovered over the Facebook app. He had an account he rarely used, mostly to see Elena's posts about her daughter or to like photos she sent him. He never shared anything himself. He had never been the kind of man to broadcast his feelings, especially not to strangers. But tonight, the weight inside him felt too heavy to carry alone. Maybe writing something down would help him breathe. He opened a blank post and stared at the blinking cursor. Words did not come easily. They felt tangled and slow, like they had to fight their way out of him. Finally, he began typing. After 30 years on the road, it ended tonight, in fire and smoke. Don't know what's next. He paused, feeling the sting behind his eyes. It was the simplest truth he had said in a long time. He scrolled through his phone gallery and found the photo taken by one of the firefighters. It showed the burned wreckage of his truck still steaming in the early morning light. The image made his stomach twist, but he attached it anyway. He felt obligated to show the reality of what had happened, even if it hurt. He signed the post with his name and nothing else. No request for help, no explanation, no attempt to soften the blow, just a statement from a man whose life had been knocked off its axis. He hovered over the post button for several long seconds, unsure if he should do it. Then, with a quiet exhale, he pressed it. The screen refreshed, and the post appeared on his page. He stared at it, feeling both empty and strangely lighter at the same time. It was out there now, floating in the digital world. Maybe no one would see it. Maybe only a handful of friends would notice. That was fine. He had not written it for anyone else. He had written it because grief needed somewhere to go. He set the phone down, turned off the lamp, and lay back on the bed. His body felt heavier than it had all day. For the first time since the fire, his mind slowed enough for sleep to finally edge close. He did not know that while he drifted toward rest, thousands of people were already reading his words. Frank woke to sunlight pressing through the thin motel curtains, harsher than usual and unwelcome. His body ached from restless sleep, and for a brief moment, he forgot where he was. Then the smell of old carpet and rattling air conditioner reminded him. The motel, the fire, the truck he no longer had. He rubbed his eyes and reached for his phone, expecting maybe a message from Russ or a question from Elena. Instead, the notification screen showed numbers he did not understand at first. Dozens of alerts, then hundreds, likes, comments, shares. His heart skipped as he unlocked his phone. His post from the night before, the one he expected to disappear unnoticed, had exploded. Truckers from all over the country had found it. Someone must have shared it into one of the big trucking groups because the comments poured in faster than he could read them. Words from strangers, words from people who understood, words from people who had lived the same long nights, the same breakdowns, the same moments of fear on the side of a lonely highway. One comment read, "Lost my rig in Wyoming 2 years ago. Felt like losing a piece of myself. Hang in there, brother." Another said, 30 years behind the wheel myself. Your story hit hard. You are not alone out there. A picture appeared from a driver in Montana showing his old burned trailer from a winter accident. Another from a widow whose husband had died hauling freight, saying Frank's story reminded her of the quiet strength of men like him. Many comments simply said, "Praying for you," or "Stay strong," or "We got your back." Frank scrolled slowly, stunned. His hands trembled as he read comment after comment from people he had never met, yet somehow felt connected to. The trucking community had always been a loose network of rough edges and long nights, but seeing strangers lift him up with such sincerity shook something loose inside him. Then came the shares, hundreds, then thousands. Drivers reposted his message with captions like, "This could have been any of us," or "30 years of service deserves better," or "Help this man get back on his feet." Within hours, the post reached working-class families, mechanics, dispatchers, gas station attendants, and retirees who had spent their lives on the road. Each one added their voice. Some offered advice, others offered prayers. A few asked if he had a GoFundMe, assuming he needed one. Some asked for his Cash App. Others insisted he deserved help, whether he asked for it or not. Frank stared at the flood of empathy with disbelief. His first instinct was to shut the app and hide. He had never been comfortable being the center of attention. He hated the idea of strangers feeling sorry for him. But as he scrolled, something unexpected happened. Instead of feeling ashamed, he felt seen. Not pitied, seen. Many comments came from people who understood what the road could take from a person. They wrote about missing birthdays, missing dinners, missing first steps and last goodbyes. They wrote about trucks that felt like home because the real homes were too far away. For the first time since the fire, Frank did not feel completely alone. He set the phone down on the bed, overwhelmed. The emotions hit all at once. The exhaustion, the grief, and now something new, something he had not felt in days, a flicker of hope. Frank sat back on the edge of the motel bed, phone still glowing in his hand. The comments continued to rise, more support, more faces, more names he had never seen before, but who spoke to him as if he were a brother on the same long road they had all traveled. He had not expected any of it, especially not this. He scrolled again and noticed someone had shared the post into a national trucking forum. That group alone had over 100,000 members. Dozens of replies came in every minute. Photos of trucks, prayers for safety, notes from wives and husbands thanking people like Frank for spending their lives keeping America moving. One message read, "My dad hauled freight for 40 years. Men like you are the backbone of this country. Do not give up." Another said, "If you ever pass through Tulsa again, dinner is on me." No questions asked. The kindness soaked into him slowly like warm sunlight after a long, cold night. He had spent days believing he was stranded, forgotten, and failing. Now he realized hundreds of strangers considered him part of something bigger than his losses. His eyes stung and he pressed his palm against his forehead. He whispered to himself, almost afraid to admit the feeling forming inside him. Maybe I am not finished. Not yet. He refreshed the page one more time. At the top sat a message he had not seen before. The sender was not from a trucking group. The profile picture showed a clean black background with a subtle silver logo. The message said, "Mr. Salazar, I work with Keanu Reeves. He has seen your story. Please call me when you can. We would like to talk." Frank froze, staring at the screen as his heartbeat quickened. Everything in his life was about to change. Frank stared at the message for a long time, frozen in the dim motel room as the desert sun shifted slowly across the stained carpet. He blinked, expecting the words to rearrange themselves or disappear entirely. They did not. The message remained exactly the same. "Mr. Salazar, Keanu Reeves read your story. He would like to speak with you personally. Please contact me at your earliest convenience." It was signed by someone named Angela, who identified herself as part of the Keanu Reeves Foundation. A short signature, a small logo, simple, professional, completely unbelievable. Frank whispered the name aloud. Keanu Reeves. It sounded strange in his voice. Too big, too distant, like something from a different world. He had watched Keanu in movies since the 90s, from action films to quiet dramas. He always admired the way the man carried himself, calm, respectful, almost shy in interviews. Someone who felt real in a world full of noise. But the idea that Keanu Reeves had read his Facebook post, the one he wrote in the middle of the night, while half-broken and exhausted, seemed impossible. Someone had to be messing with him. Online scams were everywhere. Fake accounts, fake charities, fake promises. Why would Keanu Reeves care about a trucker who had lost everything on the side of I-10? He tapped the message icon again, rechecking the profile. Verified. Clean history. Professional posts. Genuine links to real organizations. Nothing sloppy or suspicious. Still, his mind rejected it. He set the phone down, rubbed his face, and muttered to himself, "No way, not real." But something inside him stirred, a very small voice, a voice he had not heard in days. Hope. He picked up his phone again, this time reading slowly, word by word, searching for anything that felt wrong. Every detail looked legitimate. He checked the foundation website mentioned in the profile. There it was, a real foundation Keanu supported for years. Programs for low-income families, scholarships, humanitarian projects, and a new initiative focused on supporting workers in crisis, which included a section on truckers, paramedics, and veterans. Frank exhaled, but still did not trust what he saw. He copied the phone number from the message and searched it online. His heart jumped when it matched a public contact listing for the foundation. Even then, he hesitated. His thumb hovered over the call button, but he could not bring himself to press it. The fear of humiliation held him back. The thought of being laughed at or tricked after the worst week of his life was too much. He closed the phone slowly and leaned back on the motel bed. His chest tightened. What if it was real? What if he ignored it and lost the one chance he would ever get? But what if it was fake and he walked into a trap that preyed on desperate men? His thoughts tangled until he could not separate fear from possibility. He lay awake most of the night, turning from side to side, unable to rest. Every time he closed his eyes, the message appeared in his mind again. Keanu Reeves read your story. Frank woke to the sound of his phone vibrating against the nightstand. He jolted upright, heart pounding, unsure if he had overslept or missed a call from Elena. For a moment, he forgot about the message from the foundation, but when he reached for the phone, the screen lit up with a notification he did not expect. "Good morning, Mr. Salazar. This is Angela again. Please let me know when you are available for a brief call." Attached was a second message with a direct video meeting link. Professional layout, clear branding, no shortcuts, nothing sloppy or suspicious. The kind of care someone took only when the communication mattered. Frank sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the screen as anxiety washed over him. His hands trembled, his throat tightened. He felt foolish for being nervous, but the idea of connecting with anyone from Keanu Reeves's world filled him with a weight he could not explain. He finally typed back a simple message. "I am available." He hesitated before pressing send, but eventually his thumb tapped the screen. The message went through. It sat there glowing back at him. There was no turning back. 2 minutes later, another notification appeared. "Great. I will call you shortly." Frank's stomach twisted. He ran a hand through his hair, suddenly aware of how he looked. A worn t-shirt, unshaven face, tired eyes. He considered splashing water on his face, maybe straightening his shirt, but the phone buzzed again before he could stand. Incoming video call. He stared at the screen for a long breath, then another. He finally answered. The image loaded slowly. First, a blur, then the outline of a woman's face. Angela, early 40s, calm expression, professional clothing, a soft background behind her that looked like an office. The lighting was clean, her voice warm. "Mr. Salazar, good morning. Thank you for taking the call." Frank cleared his throat. "Morning. I hope I am not causing trouble." "Not at all. Keanu read your story last night. He was very moved by it." Frank blinked. The words hit harder than he expected. He had imagined she might say the foundation team reviewed his situation, or that they discussed potential support. but hearing that Keanu himself had read the post brought a pressure to his chest, the kind that pushed emotions forward before he could fight them back. "I still cannot believe that," he said quietly. "I understand," Angela replied with a gentle smile. "People reach out to him constantly, but he notices stories like yours. Stories about hardworking people who have carried more weight than the world realizes. He asked me to reach out personally on his behalf." Frank lowered his gaze. His eyes burned. He did not want to cry in front of a stranger. It already felt unreal that a celebrity, someone he had never met, cared enough to follow up. Angela continued, "To be completely transparent, Keanu asked to speak with you himself. We never pressure anyone into these conversations, but he believes your decades of service deserve acknowledgement." Frank looked up slowly. "You mean he wants to talk to me?" "Directly." "Yes," she said with a sincere nod. "If you are comfortable, he would like to join this call in a moment." Frank froze. His breath caught. His world narrowed to the small glowing screen in front of him. A man who felt impossibly distant was suddenly one click away. Frank swallowed hard, unable to speak. He had no idea what someone was supposed to say in a moment like this. His heartbeat thudded in his ears. He tried to steady his breathing, but his chest felt tight, as if years of stress and exhaustion were rushing to the surface all at once. Angela glanced down, then back at him. "He is joining now." The screen shifted. A brief pause. Then another window opened. A familiar face appeared. Calm, kind-eyed, slightly tired in a way that made him seem human rather than untouchable. It was unmistakably Keanu Reeves. Frank's breath caught. His voice vanished. Keanu offered a small, warm smile. "Frank, it is really good to meet you. I hope I am not catching you at a bad time." Frank shook his head quickly, still stunned. "No, sir. No, this is fine. I never thought." Keanu nodded gently. "I understand. I saw your story last night. 30 years on the road is a lifetime of service. What happened to your truck was heartbreaking, and I wanted to reach out because no one should face something like that alone." Frank stared at the screen, overwhelmed. He could not believe Keanu Reeves was thanking him. No one had ever thanked him for being a trucker. Not really. Not like this. Keanu continued, "I know how much sacrifice goes into the work you do, the long nights, the time away from family, the miles that never end. You carried all of that with dignity, and even now, after losing everything, you still wrote with gratitude rather than anger. That matters, Frank." Frank felt his throat tighten as Keanu leaned closer to the camera. "I think you deserve a second chance, and I want to help you find it." The motel room fell silent as Frank felt his entire world begin to shift. Frank sat motionless on the motel bed long after the call ended, staring at the darkened screen of his phone as if the entire conversation might fade away if he blinked. He replayed Keanu's words in his mind again and again. The sincerity, the calm strength in his voice, the way he spoke to him not as a celebrity reaching down to someone in trouble, but as one human being offering a hand to another. It did not feel real. It felt like something he had dreamed during one of his restless nights, one of those dreams that is too warm and too painful to wake from. But it had been real. Keanu Reeves had spoken to him, thanked him, acknowledged his life on the road, and said he deserved a second chance. Frank rubbed his hands together slowly, a nervous gesture he had not recognized in himself in years. He could not remember the last time someone had looked him in the eyes, even through a screen, and said he mattered. A soft chime interrupted his thoughts. A new message from Angela. "Mr. Salazar, Keanu would like to invite you to Los Angeles for a private conversation regarding the support initiative he mentioned. If you are open to it, I can arrange travel and accommodations immediately." Frank stared at the message, stunned. Los Angeles. He had spent his entire life transporting goods across the country, but the idea of flying to Los Angeles for a meeting with Keanu Reeves felt like something that belonged to someone else's life. He typed slowly, "Are you sure?" The reply came within seconds. "Absolutely. He would like to meet you in person. We will handle everything. You will not need to pay for anything." Frank let the phone fall gently onto the blanket beside him. His heart felt heavy with disbelief. He had spent the last week feeling like he was sinking, like every breath dragged him deeper under the weight of failure. Now suddenly someone was offering him a lifeline. Not just anyone. Someone whose kindness the world talked about. Someone with the power to change another person's life with a single choice. He shook his head and whispered, "This cannot be happening." But the phone chimed again. "Here is a flight option for tomorrow morning departing from Tucson. If the time works for you, I can confirm it right away." He clicked the link. A seat already reserved, a clean itinerary, hotel booking attached, meal vouchers, transportation from the airport. Everything was arranged carefully, respectfully, with the sort of detail he usually saw when delivering a high-value load. A part of him resisted, the part shaped by years of struggle, years of doing everything alone, years of refusing help, even when he needed it most. Accepting kindness felt like weakness. Letting someone carry the burden for him felt wrong, but he remembered Keanu's face on the screen, the honest warmth in his voice. "I am not doing this for the cameras. I am doing this because people like you matter." Frank closed his eyes and inhaled unsteadily. He realized something important. He had nothing left to lose. And maybe, just maybe, something to gain. He picked up the phone again. "Yes," he wrote. "Book it." Frank did not sleep much that night. He lay in the motel bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the hum of the old air conditioner and the distant noise of trucks rolling along the interstate. He felt suspended between two worlds. One was the familiar world of long hauls, diesel fumes, and silent resilience. The other was a world he never imagined stepping into, a world where a man like Keanu Reeves reached out to him with compassion that felt almost unreal. Every few minutes he turned on his phone to reread the messages, afraid something might change or disappear. The flight confirmation, the hotel reservation near downtown Los Angeles, Angela's final note written with the same steadiness she had shown the entire time. "We are honored to welcome you. Please let me know if you need anything at all." Frank was not used to language like that, honored to welcome him. He spent his life delivering freight, not meeting Hollywood icons. He felt so out of place, he wondered if the Foundation had made a mistake, chosen the wrong person, or misread his story. But every detail pointed to intention. Someone had looked at his life, his struggle, his years of sacrifice, and decided he deserved attention. He deserved help. He deserved a moment of dignity. At 4:30 in the morning, unable to lie still any longer, he got up and splashed cold water on his face in the small bathroom. The mirror reflected a worn man with tired eyes and a stubble that needed trimming, but there was something else in the reflection too. A spark, he thought, had burned out days ago. He shaved slowly, carefully, as if preparing for something sacred. He combed his graying hair, buttoned the cleanest shirt he had, and folded the rest of his belongings into his old backpack. At dawn, he stepped outside. The sky over the desert glowed faint orange, the horizon still cool with night air. He locked the motel door and walked across the quiet parking lot, feeling the weight of the moment press into him. It was not fear this time. It was the realization that life was shifting in a direction he could not predict. The rideshare. Angela arranged arrived right on time. The driver was friendly and talkative, asking Frank if he was traveling for business or vacation. Frank hesitated, unsure how to describe what was happening. When he finally replied, he kept it simple. Meeting someone. At the airport, everything moved quickly. He checked in using the digital boarding pass Angela had sent. The clerk noticed he looked overwhelmed and helped him with a kind smile. The security line was long, but as he shuffled through it, Frank had time to breathe, time to think, time to accept that he was stepping into a place he never thought he would be invited to enter. When he boarded the plane, he sat by the window. As the aircraft lifted off, the desert fell away beneath him. The empty highways, the dry, sunburned earth, the lonely motel where he thought his life had ended. The higher they climbed, the smaller it looked. The fire, the loss, the heartbreak, all of it shrinking with each passing second. For the first time in years, Frank felt himself rising too. The flight to Los Angeles felt longer than it was, not because of distance, but because of the weight inside Frank's chest. He had spent 30 years on highways, but flying above the clouds was different. He felt unmoored, drifting somewhere between the man he used to be and the man he might become. He watched the world stretch out beneath the plane, and with every passing mile, the desert gave way to mountains, then cities, then the shimmering sprawl of Los Angeles. When the plane landed, the noise of the bustling airport struck him immediately. Families hurried with luggage. Business travelers spoke quickly into phones. Announcements echoed overhead. Frank stood still for a moment, letting the crowd flow around him, like water around a rock. He had never felt more out of place. His phone buzzed. A message from Angela. "Your driver is waiting outside Terminal 3. He will be holding a sign with your name. Welcome to Los Angeles." Outside, the air was cooler than he expected. A black SUV pulled up, and a man in a neat suit stepped out holding a sign that read, "Mr. Frank Salazar." Frank nodded and introduced himself, embarrassed by the worn backpack slung over his shoulder. The driver greeted him with genuine respect, as if Frank belonged there just as much as anyone else. During the ride, Frank stared out the window at the unfamiliar landscape. Towering buildings, palm trees, bending in the breeze, endless streams of traffic. He felt small in a city that moved so fast, yet beneath the nerves was something else. A quiet steadiness, a sense that maybe, despite everything, he had been brought here for a reason. The hotel Angela reserved for him stood tall on a clean boulevard lined with flowers and glass storefronts. It was far nicer than any place he had ever stayed. As he checked in, the staff treated him with warmth and respect, never once questioning who he was or why he was there. In his room, Frank opened the curtains and looked out over the city. The sky was turning gold with the setting sun, and the lights of Los Angeles flickered, awake one by one. Somewhere in this vast city, Keanu Reeves was waiting to meet him. For the first time since the fire, Frank felt a new sensation rising in his chest. Possibility. Frank stood at the window of his Los Angeles hotel room long after he arrived, watching the coastline curve toward the horizon. The ocean shimmered with late afternoon light waves, rolling in slow, steady rhythms that felt foreign after decades of desert highways and inland routes. He had driven through almost every state in the country, but he had never stayed anywhere like this. The room was quiet, clean, comfortable in a way that felt undeserved. He ran his hand over the back of the chair, touched the smooth surface of the desk, and let the cool air from the vent wash over him. After the week he had lived, it felt unreal to stand somewhere safe. The flight earlier had stayed with him. Even after the rush of landing and checking in, his mind kept drifting back to those moments in the sky. Sitting by the window, he had looked down at the thin highways that cut across the earth like veins. Highways he knew by heart. He recognized stretches of road the way other people recognized old friends. The desert paths he had driven for years appeared as faded lines below him. He had followed those roads through storms, heat waves, lonely nights, and quiet mornings. And now he was looking at them from above, as if life had lifted him out of the world he knew and placed him somewhere entirely new. He thought about how quickly everything had changed. 1 week ago, he sat on the shoulder of I-10 watching his truck burn. He had felt the heat on his face, the smoke stinging his eyes, the weight of years collapsing into 10 minutes of fire. Now, he was standing in a luxury hotel, invited by a man he never thought he would meet. The contrast shook him. He sat on the edge of the bed and sighed deeply. The moment felt too full to carry alone. He reached for his phone and hesitated. He had not told Elena the truth yet. He had lied because he did not want to burden her, because he thought he could shield her from his struggle. But now, in this quiet room overlooking the ocean, he realized the lie had built a wall between them, a wall she did not deserve. He pressed the video call button before he could convince himself not to. The phone rang once, twice. Then Elena's face appeared, framed by the warm light of her small kitchen back in Phoenix. She was wearing her scrubs, her hair pulled back the way she always did after a long shift. When she saw him, her eyes brightened with relief. "Dad, you made it there safely." Frank nodded. "Yeah, I am here. The hotel is something else. They put me near the coast, I can see the ocean from the window." She smiled. "That is incredible. I am glad you are safe." Her smile made his chest tighten. He looked down for a moment, collecting himself. "Elena, there is something I need to tell you." Immediately, her expression shifted from relief to concern. "What happened?" Frank exhaled slowly. It was time. Frank steadied his breathing as Elena waited on the screen, her eyes full of worry. He felt the weight of everything he had hidden pressing on his chest. He had carried it alone because he believed he had to, because he thought that was what strong fathers did. But now, looking at her through the small lens of his phone, he realized how wrong he had been. "Elena, the truck is gone." Her eyes widened. "Gone? What do you mean, gone?" He swallowed. "It caught fire outside Tucson, an engine failure. There was nothing I could do. The whole cab burned, everything inside. All of it." For a few seconds, she said nothing. Her hand rose slowly to her mouth and her breath hitched. He watched her eyes shine, not with anger or disappointment, but with heartbreak he never meant to cause. "Dad, oh Dad, why did you not tell me?" Frank lowered his gaze. "I did not want you to worry. You work so hard. You are raising Sophia on your own. I did not want to add another problem to your plate. I thought I could fix it. I thought I had to fix it." Elena shook her head, tears beginning to fall. "You are my father. You are not a burden. You could never be a burden. You went through that fire alone. You lost the truck alone. You sat in that motel alone, and you let yourself believe that you had nobody to turn to. Why?" His voice cracked. "Because I did not want you to see me fail." She wiped her cheeks with the back of her hand. "Fail. You spent 30 years keeping food on our table. You worked through storms and nights and holidays. You put me through school. You gave up everything for us. Losing a truck is not failure. Losing hope is, and I will not let you lose that, not while I am here." Frank felt something inside him break and release at the same time. A long-held tension, a silent weight. He lifted his eyes to hers. "I am sorry," he whispered. "I should have told you sooner." She nodded slowly. "Just promise me you will not hide things again. We are in this together. You were never alone. You just forgot that." He closed his eyes for a moment, letting her words settle into places that had been empty for too long. When he opened them, she was smiling softly through her tears. "Tell me about Los Angeles. Tell me why you are there." Frank let out a breath that carried a week of fear with it. He told her about the viral post about the message from Angela and about the call from Keanu Reeves. As he spoke, disbelief flickered across her face, followed by amazement, then joy so bright it lifted the room around him. "Dad, this is a miracle. You needed help, and somehow the right person saw you at the right time." Frank nodded slowly. "Maybe life has a way of surprising us when we least expect it. Maybe it was his turn to stop surviving and start hoping again." Frank hardly slept the night before the meeting. Even after the emotional call with Elena, even after stepping out onto the hotel balcony to breathe in the salt air from the Pacific, his mind refused to rest. He felt suspended between fear and gratitude, between disbelief and anticipation. It was strange to be frightened and hopeful at the same time, but this was a new world for him. Nothing about it felt familiar. In the morning, a driver arrived at the hotel to take him to the meeting location. The man greeted him by name and carried Frank's worn backpack with a respect Frank was not used to. The drive wound through quiet Los Angeles streets, away from the tall hotels and closer to the industrial coast. The city slowly shifted into an area filled with large garages, storage yards, and workshops with their doors rolled open to let in the morning light. The car finally pulled up to an old brick building with tall windows and a steel sign that read Restoration Bay. The moment Frank stepped out, he heard the faint sound of tools clinking inside and smelled the clean scent of oil and new paint. The wide garage doors were open, revealing rows of motorcycles, vintage cars, and a few trucks in various stages of restoration. Polished chrome gleamed in the sunlight, and the whole place felt peaceful, almost sacred, like a workshop where stories were rebuilt along with engines. Frank took a step inside, heart pounding. There were a few workers, quietly focused on their tasks, but in the center of the room stood a man examining an old motorcycle frame. His posture was relaxed, shoulders slightly rounded, as if he had long ago learned how to blend humility with strength. The man turned when he heard footsteps. It was Keanu. He smiled warmly, his eyes soft and genuine. Frank felt a rush of disbelief followed by a strange sense of calm. Keanu walked toward him with an easy stride. "Frank, I am really glad you made it." Frank swallowed and nodded. "Thank you for inviting me." Keanu gestured around the workshop. "This is one of my favorite places. I spend a lot of time here working on builds with friends. Figured it would be the right place for us to talk. Quiet, no crowds, no noise." Frank looked around, taking in the rows of restored trucks and bikes, each one treated with care. He felt strangely at home. Machines had always been easier for him than people. Keanu motioned toward a small table set beside the front of a half-finished motorcycle. The two men sat facing each other in the warm glow of sunlight streaming through the windows. "Tell me about your life on the road," Keanu said gently. "Tell me what brought you here." Frank hesitated, unsure how to begin. No one had ever asked him to tell his story without rushing him or judging him. He clasped his hands together, took a steady breath, and began to speak. Frank began slowly, unsure if his voice would hold steady. He spoke about the long nights on the interstate and the sunrises he had watched from behind the wheel. He talked about the quiet comfort of a thermos of coffee during winter runs and the loneliness that settled in during holidays spent at truck stops. He shared how he kept working after losing his wife, because stopping meant he would have to face a house that felt too empty and memories that felt too sharp. As he spoke, something inside him loosened, and each word came easier than the last. He told Keanu about the fire, how fast it spread, how helpless he felt, how losing the truck was like losing a part of himself. When he finished, he looked down at his hands, surprised to find them shaking. He felt exposed, yet strangely lighter. Keanu sat quietly, giving every word space to exist. When Frank finally paused, Keanu nodded with deep understanding. "You carried more than miles," he said softly. "You carried grief and responsibility and the weight of keeping a family afloat. Most people never see what that takes." Frank looked up, meeting his eyes. He expected sympathy. Instead, he found recognition, a kind of shared sadness. Keanu leaned forward slightly. "I have known loss too. Losing people you love changes the shape of your life. You learn to move forward, but the pain stays with you. Not to hurt you, but to remind you of who they were." Frank listened as Keanu spoke about his best friend, about the child he never got to meet, and about the woman he hoped to spend his life with before tragedy took her too soon. His voice never broke yet. There was a quiet ache beneath every word. It was the ache of someone who had learned to live with wounds that never fully healed. "Pain does not disappear," Keanu continued, "but kindness keeps us moving. The kindness we give, the kindness we receive. Sometimes it comes from unexpected places. Sometimes it arrives right when we need it most." Frank felt his chest tighten. He nodded slowly, absorbing the truth of it. Keanu stood and gestured for him to follow. "There is something I want to show you." They walked past rows of motorcycles and restored trucks to a back section of the garage where a large tarp covered something tall and massive. Keanu placed his hand on the edge of the fabric and looked at Frank with a gentle smile. "You spent 30 years giving everything you had to this country. It is time someone gave something back to you." He pulled the tarp away. Underneath stood a brand new custom long-haul rig, deep blue paint, chrome details that gleamed like mirrors, a cabin built for comfort, safety, and long miles, the kind of truck Frank had admired from afar but never imagined driving. Frank's knees weakened. He reached out, touching the cool metal with trembling fingers. Keanu placed a hand on his shoulder. "She is yours, Frank. No strings, no cameras, no expectations. It is time to get you back on the road." Frank felt his eyes fill as the truth washed over him. For the first time since the fire, he did not feel broken. He felt chosen. Frank stood frozen in front of the gleaming blue rig, unable to speak. The light inside the garage caught the chrome and sent reflections dancing across the walls. It looked almost unreal, as if someone had carved a dream out of metal and paint. He reached out again, brushing his fingers along the curve of the door. The truck felt solid beneath his touch. Real. Alive. His throat tightened as he traced the smooth surface, noticing every detail. Custom steps, reinforced mirrors, upgraded brakes, a polished grille that looked strong enough to push through a storm. Then he saw it. His name, Salazar, etched in clean silver lettering right below the driver's window. The air left his lungs. He took a step back, gripping the edge of the doorframe because his legs threatened to give out. He had never owned anything this beautiful. He had never imagined he would. For 30 years he had driven worn rigs, borrowed rigs held together by hope and stubbornness. But this was built for someone who mattered, someone whose story deserved to continue. Keanu watched him quietly, hands resting in his pockets, giving Frank room to feel everything without rushing him. His expression held no pride and no expectation, only kindness. Frank opened the door slowly and climbed up into the cabin. The inside was even more stunning. Clean upholstery, a quiet engine system, a sleeper area that smelled of new fabric and fresh air. He turned toward the back, expecting an empty shelf. Instead, he found a small wooden photo frame waiting for him. Inside the frame was Elena's graduation picture, the one he kept taped above the dashboard in his old truck for 10 years until the fire took it. Frank pressed his hand to his mouth. His eyes lifted to the ceiling as if he could steady himself by staring upward. He blinked rapidly, but the tears came anyway. "How did you get this?" he whispered. Keanu had stepped closer to the door. "Your daughter sent it. She wanted you to feel at home the second you sat inside." Frank lowered his head, overwhelmed. She knew. She knew what this meant. She had thought about him. She had imagined him climbing into a place of dignity again. The thought filled his chest with warmth that reached all the way to his fingertips. He looked back down at the keys lying on the seat. A thick metal ring, polished and simple, holding the start key that would breathe life into this machine. Keanu picked them up gently and placed them in Frank's hand. "Welcome home, brother." The words landed with incredible weight. Not dramatic, not loud, just honest. Two men standing in a quiet garage, both of them carrying loss, both of them choosing to keep going anyway. Frank closed his fingers around the keys, feeling their cool shape press into his palm. For the first time in a long time, his heart lifted instead of sinking. He looked out the windshield at the open garage doors leading toward sunlight. He had a home again, and it had wheels. Frank stayed seated in the new truck for a long moment, letting the reality settle into his bones. The cabin felt warm, even without the engine running, like it held a heartbeat of its own. He ran his fingers over the steering wheel, feeling the texture of the leather. Everything about it was built with intention, comfort, and respect. It felt like stepping into a second chance shaped by hands that understood how much a man could lose before breaking. He finally leaned out of the door, meeting Keanu's eyes again. "I do not know how to thank you," he said quietly. "I have spent my whole life giving everything to the road. I never expected the road to give something back." Keanu smiled gently. "Sometimes life circles around in ways we cannot predict. Sometimes the people who carry the heaviest loads finally get the moment they deserve. You earned this, Frank." Frank shook his head slowly. "I do not know if I earned something like this." Keanu stepped closer. "You did. And I am not giving it to you because of what you lost. I am giving it to you because of everything you held together for 30 years. Your family, your work, your integrity. That matters more than you realize." Frank's chest tightened again, but this time the feeling was not grief. It was gratitude so deep it made his hands tremble. He looked back inside at the photo of Elena, her smile bright and proud, the same smile that had pushed him through years of exhaustion. She would cry when she saw him behind this wheel. He knew it. He felt the truth of it, like a warmth spreading through his ribs. Keanu walked around the front of the rig, stopping near the massive chrome bumper. "One more thing before you take her out," he said. "I arranged for your first haul. It is waiting at the port right now." Frank blinked, unsure he heard correctly. "My first haul." Keanu nodded. "It is headed straight to Phoenix." A soft sound escaped Frank's throat. He turned away for a moment, pretending to look at the rig again, but really he was fighting the sudden rush of emotion that hit him. Phoenix. Home. He would be on the road again. He would see Elena and Sophia within days. He would not return as a man defeated, but as a man rebuilt. He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. "You thought of everything." "I just wanted to give you a path forward," Keanu replied, "and maybe a small blessing along the way." Frank stepped down from the cab, standing beside the truck that now belonged to him. He placed a hand on the cool metal again, grounding himself. The weight of the keys in his pocket felt like the beginning of a new chapter. A chapter he never expected to have. He exhaled slowly, then he nodded. "All right, let us take her for a run." Keanu smiled, not the smile of a celebrity, but the smile of a friend who understood the journey ahead. Two men stood together in the quiet garage, surrounded by sunlight and possibility. And Frank's life began again. The drive to Phoenix felt different from any run Frank had ever made. The hum of the engine beneath him was steady and confident, a sound that settled into his chest like a heartbeat. The steering wheel felt solid in his hands, smooth but strong, and every mile reminded him that he was not returning in defeat. He was returning in triumph. The desert stretched out around him in long golden waves, and for the first time since the fire, he felt at peace. Not comfortable, not carefree, but deeply, quietly at peace. He glanced once at the framed photo sitting securely on the passenger seat. It showed him and Keanu standing in front of the new rig, both smiling, both looking like two men who had weathered storms and somehow made it through. On the back was the message Keanu had written to Elena. He had read it at least 10 times during the trip. The words warmed him every time. "Your dad is a hero. Keanu Reeves." He could not wait to give it to her. By the time he reached Phoenix, the sun hovered low over the city, casting warm orange light across rooftops and palm trees. He knew Elena's birthday gathering was happening that afternoon. He imagined her in the kitchen, maybe frosting a cake or preparing snacks, still in disbelief that her father had flown to Los Angeles. He wondered if she suspected he might show up. Probably not. He had never surprised her like this. As he turned onto her street, he shifted into a lower gear, letting the rumble of the engine echo gently between the houses. Neighbors stepped outside, drawn by the sound of a brand-new long-haul rig cruising through a quiet suburban block. Some raised their phones, some pointed. But Frank kept his focus on the house at the end of the street, the beige one, with the little cactus garden Elena had planted with her daughter. He pulled up slowly, parking the truck along the curb. The polished chrome reflected the late afternoon sky. The lettering on the side shimmered. Salazar. Frank opened the door and climbed down his boots, touching the pavement with a sense of arrival so powerful it nearly buckled his knees. He took a breath and stepped back from the truck, giving himself a moment to take it all in. Then the front door swung open. Elena stepped out with a dish towel in her hand, probably thinking it was a delivery truck or a neighbor's visitor. Her gaze lifted casually toward the rig. She froze. Her hand flew to her mouth. "Dad." Frank smiled softly. "Happy birthday, mija." She dropped the towel and ran toward him, tears already streaming before she reached his arms. Elena collided with him in a tight embrace, the kind she had not given him since she was a teenager. Her shoulders shook as she held on, crying into his shirt without a single attempt to hide it. Frank wrapped his arms around her, steadying her the way he used to when she fell off her bike or scraped her knees as a child. For a moment, time folded in on itself, and he felt like a young father again, instead of a man who had recently stood lost on the side of I-10 watching his world burn. She pulled back just enough to look at him. "When did you get this?" "How? What happened?" Frank laughed softly, wiping a tear from her cheek. "It is a long story, and I will tell you all of it, but not yet. There is someone else who needs to see this first." A small voice came from the doorway. Grandpa Sophia ran out with her hair bouncing in curls, her arms wide, her tiny sneakers tapping quickly across the driveway. She crashed into him with all the enthusiasm her little body could hold. He scooped her up, lifting her easily, feeling her joy wrap around him like sunlight. "Grandpa, is that your truck? The big blue one, the one that makes the loud sound?" Frank grinned. "What do you think, kiddo?" She looked at the rig again, her mouth widening into awe. "It is magic." Her words hit him deeper than she knew. Because she was right. In a way, it was magic. The kind that did not come from tricks or illusions, but from kindness that arrived when a man believed he had run out of miracles. Frank carried her closer to the truck, Elena following with a hand over her heart. When she saw her father's name etched on the side, she let out a soft cry. "Dad, they put your name on it." Frank nodded. "They did. Seems they thought this old man deserved something good." She shook her head. "Not something good, something right." Sophia tugged on his collar. "Can I see inside? Can I see where you sleep?" Frank opened the door and lifted her up. Her eyes widened at the clean interior, at the soft lighting, at the framed photo on the shelf. She pointed to it immediately. "Grandpa, that is Mommy." Elena stepped closer, tears welling again. She reached for the frame and held it gently. "This was in your old truck." Frank nodded. "It was. Someone thought it should be in the new one, too." Elena turned the frame over. When she saw the writing on the back, her breath caught. She pressed her fingers to her lips as she read the message again and again. "Dad, did he really write this?" Frank smiled. "He did. He wanted you to know how much your strength meant to me all these years." She looked up, trying to steady herself. Her eyes glistened with pride and disbelief. She hugged the frame against her chest, holding it like something sacred. Inside the house, family members peeked through the windows, whispering in excitement. The big blue truck outside had drawn an audience, but no one approached. They knew this moment belonged to Frank, Elena, and Sophia. Frank lifted his granddaughter again, setting her on the driver's seat. She placed her tiny hands on the steering wheel, giggling. "Grandpa, can we go for a ride?" He looked at Elena. She wiped her eyes and nodded. "Go ahead, Dad. You earned this moment." Frank placed one hand over Sophia's and stared out at the warm Phoenix evening. The engine was quiet for now, but he knew the road was waiting. Not as a burden this time, but as a home rebuilt, a birthday to remember, a family restored, and a man who had almost given up rediscovered his purpose behind the wheel of rolling thunder. The smell of pot roast filled Elena's kitchen, warm and comforting, wrapping the room in a sense of home. The table was set with simple dishes, nothing fancy, but the atmosphere carried more joy than any restaurant could hold. Family photos lined the walls. Sophia's school drawings were taped to the refrigerator. The hum of conversation drifted through the house as relatives chatted in the living room, still buzzing over the sight of Frank's new truck, parked outside like a blue giant guarding the street. Frank sat at the table with a steady but softened expression. Gratitude had a way of slowing his movements, making him more deliberate. He watched Elena add the last dish to the table, then take her seat across from him. She looked tired from the excitement of the day, but her smile glowed with a peace he had not seen in her in months. As they began to eat, laughter bubbled naturally between them, the kind that comes when the worst is finally behind you. Sophia climbed onto Frank's lap mid-dinner, insisting she needed to help Grandpa eat, and he gladly let her. Her small hands reached for carrots, placing them on his plate one at a time with great seriousness. It was the simplest moment. Yet to Frank it felt like a miracle. He looked down at his granddaughter, then at his daughter, and a quiet truth settled into him. He had been so close to losing all of this, not in the physical sense, but emotionally. If he had stayed silent, if he had kept drowning in pride and pain, he might have drifted too far away for them to pull him back. Elena noticed his thoughtful gaze. She set down her fork and leaned forward a little. "What is on your mind, Dad?" Frank let out a slow breath. "I was just thinking about how close I came to giving up, closer than I ever admitted. I sat in that motel room and thought my life might be done, not because of the fire, but because I did not see a way forward." Elena's expression softened. She reached across the table and took his hand. You do not have to carry everything anymore. Not alone. He nodded. I know that now. I think I had forgotten it. They sat there for a moment, hands joined, letting the quiet settle over them. Frank finally continued, I want you to know something. I am going back on the road, but it is going to be different this time. No more disappearing for months. No more trying to outrun my life. Elena squeezed his hand gently. Different, how Frank smiled. The truck Keanu gave me, it has options, better routes, better comfort. And I already talked with the dispatch. I can schedule hauls that bring me home every 2 weeks, maybe even more often, depending on the load. Her eyes filled slightly, not with sadness, but with a deep and grateful relief. That means you will be here for dinners, for school plays, for birthdays. That is the plan, he said softly. I do not want to miss anything anymore. Before Elena could respond, Sophia tugged at his sleeve. Grandpa, are you staying tonight? Frank kissed the top of her head. Tonight and many nights after. Sophia slid off Frank's lap and ran to the living room, leaving him and Elena in a gentle silence. The kind of silence that comes after heavy truths and healing words. Elena looked at him with an expression that blended disbelief, admiration, and a tenderness only a daughter could feel for a father who had survived more than he ever admitted. There is something else, Dad, she said quietly. I can tell. What is it? Frank took a sip of water as if steadying himself. When he set the glass down, he met her eyes. Keanu offered me something. Not a job exactly, more like a role, part-time, something I can do when I am off the road. Elena's eyebrows rose. With his foundation, Frank nodded. He wants me to work with other truckers, men and women who feel alone, folks who have lost rigs, lost hope, or just need someone who knows the road the way they do, someone who understands the weight they carry. A soft, emotional smile touched her lips. Dad, that sounds perfect for you. Frank exhaled, almost laughing, from how strange and yet how right it felt. I never thought I would have a purpose beyond driving freight, but this feels bigger, and it feels like everything I have been through might help someone else find their footing again. Elena reached out and rested her hand on his. I am proud of you, more than you know. You are turning the hardest year of your life into something that could save someone else's. Frank felt warmth spread through him. He wished his wife could have seen this moment, the family they built, the resilience she helped shape. He hoped wherever she was, she knew. Sophia ran back into the room holding a drawing. She placed it in Frank's hands with a shy smile. It showed a big blue truck, a stick figure with white hair, and a little girl waving from the passenger side. Above it, in uneven letters, she wrote Grandpa's magic truck. Frank's heart swelled. He pulled her into his arms and kissed the top of her head. You drew this for me? She nodded proudly. Because you are a hero like the movies. He laughed softly. Not like the movies, kiddo, but I am trying my best. The evening continued with laughter, warm food, and stories. As the night deepened, Frank leaned back in his chair and let the murmur of family voices wash over him. The weight of the past months felt lighter than ever, not gone, but transformed. What had once been a burden was now part of a purpose, a new mission. He looked at Elena and Sophia sitting together on the couch. This, he thought, is what really matters. And for the first time in a long time, he felt ready for the road ahead. 2 weeks after Frank's homecoming, a quiet interview aired on a small community network, the kind that focused on human stories rather than celebrity gossip. The studio was simple, the chairs unadorned and the lighting warm. Keanu sat calmly, hands folded, posture relaxed, wearing the same kind of clothes he had worn the day he met Frank in the restoration garage. The interviewer leaned forward with curiosity and sincerity. The world has heard a bit about what you did for Frank Salazar, she said gently, but no one knows why. There was no press release. No charity headline, no cameras. Why help a trucker? You had never met, Keanu thought for a moment, his eyes lowering, as if the answer lived somewhere in the past. When he finally lifted his gaze, it carried a softness that came from memory rather than performance. When I was a kid, he began. My stepfather was a long-haul trucker. He worked the northern routes, dangerous roads, winters that could swallow a man whole. But he always said trucking was honest work, hard work, the kind that kept families alive. The interviewer nodded, encouraging him to continue. There was one night, Keanu said, when he was driving through a blizzard in Alberta. Whiteout conditions, wind that shook the trailer. Most drivers pulled over to wait it out, but he saw a rig up ahead, jackknife on the ice. Another driver was stuck inside. My stepfather stopped. His truck fought his way through the storm and pulled the man out just before the fuel tank caught fire. The studio fell silent. Keanu's voice remained low, steady, but carried a reverence that revealed how deeply the story had shaped him. I was young, he said, but I remember him coming home after that haul. He was exhausted, shaking, covered in frost. But he told me without any hero talk, without bragging, that you never leave someone behind on the road. Not ever. Keanu paused. That stayed with me. The interviewer took a breath. Is that why you stepped in when you saw Frank's post? Keanu nodded. Truckers built this country. They carried everything. Food, medicine, supplies, hope. People forget that sometimes. And too often when they fall, no one notices. No one helps them back up. His expression softened more. I do not want to live in a world where we forget the people who hold it together. The camera cut to a quiet montage recorded over several months. Footage showed Keanu walking through truck stops at dawn, anonymously buying meals for drivers who looked worn from the road. There were clips of him donating winter gear at rest stations in the Rockies, sticking handwritten notes inside the pockets that said things like, "Keep going and you matter." Another video showed him listening to stories from drivers in Nevada, leaning against fuel pumps as men and women shared their exhaustion, loneliness, and pride. No red carpets, no spotlights, just a man honoring the people who kept America running. Then the montage faded, revealing a new title card, the Rolling Hope Project, founded by Keanu Reeves. The initiative had officially launched, and Frank Salazar, the man who once stood in ashes, was its first ambassador. The interview continued with quiet intensity, the kind that grows not from drama, but from truth. The interviewer leaned in slightly. So, the Rolling Hope Project, what exactly is its mission? Keanu smiled gently, the kind of smile that carried conviction rather than showmanship. The mission is simple: support drivers who fall through the cracks. Help the people who help everyone else. We are building a network of resources, emergency funds, mental health support, replacement equipment for drivers who lose rigs in accidents or disasters, and, most importantly, a community, so no one feels abandoned. The interviewer nodded with admiration. And Frank is part of this now. Keanu's expression brightened with something close to pride. Frank is more than part of it. He is the heart of it. What he survived would have crushed many men, but he stood back up. And people listened to him because he has lived the road. He knows the loneliness. He knows the struggle. He knows what it means to keep going when you have nothing left. The screen shifted again. This time it showed footage of Frank standing beside his blue rig at a small truck stop outside Phoenix. He spoke to a group of drivers gathered around him, explaining his role with clear, steady sincerity. His voice carried humility, never authority. He talked about the fire, about the motel room, about the message from a stranger that changed everything. Truckers nodded, some wiping their eyes, others pressed hands to their chests. These were people who rarely cried, but Frank's story slipped past their defenses. Keanu's voice narrated over the clip. I asked Frank to be our first ambassador because he represents what this project stands for: resilience, hope, community, and the belief that no one should fight their battles alone. More footage appeared. Frank handing out information packets. Frank listening to an older driver talk about losing his wife. Frank hugging a young trucker who had recently fallen behind on payments. Frank standing tall beside his new rig, the name Salazar glinting proudly in the sun. The montage then shifted back to Keanu in the studio. When people ask why I helped him, he said softly, I tell them the same thing. Because someone once taught me that the road is not just pavement. It is connection. It is humanity stretched across miles. And if we do not show up for each other out there, we lose something important. The interviewer swallowed, visibly moved. It sounds like this is personal for you. Keanu nodded. All kindness is personal. All hope is personal. That is why we built Rolling Hope, to make sure people like Frank are never invisible again. The camera slowly zoomed in as he finished with a quiet, unwavering certainty. Truckers built this country. Now it is our turn to build something for them. The screen faded to black, leaving those final words hanging like a promise. And for the first time in his life, Frank Salazar was not just a driver. He was a symbol of hope for thousands who lived their lives on the open road. 2 months passed in a steady rhythm of highway miles and restored purpose. Frank settled comfortably into his new life, balancing regular hauls with his ambassador work for the Rolling Hope project. He found himself speaking to groups of drivers, sharing encouragement, and guiding truckers toward resources he wished he had known about years earlier. Every time he stood in front of a room, he felt the weight of the past lifting, replaced by a sense of meaning he could not have imagined during the darkest days after the fire. Today, he was on the final leg of a 3-day route through New Mexico and into West Texas. The sun was still low when he rolled into a small town whose main street looked like it had not changed in 50 years. A weathered diner sat at the corner, its neon sign flickering in the morning light. He pulled his blue rig into the gravel lot, the engine humming down to silence. The smell of coffee drifted from inside when he opened the diner door. Frank chose a booth near the window where he could watch the town wake up. A waitress with graying hair and a warm smile poured him a cup of coffee without asking. He thanked her and stirred in a little cream, savoring the familiar comfort that came with the first sip of the day. He ordered eggs and toast, nothing fancy, just enough to carry him through the morning. A few minutes later, the bell over the door jingled. A young man walked in wearing a faded work jacket and boots splattered with dry mud. He looked exhausted, the kind of exhaustion that came not from one bad night, but from too many in a row. His shoulders sagged as he took a seat at the counter. Frank recognized the posture instantly. He had worn it himself not long ago. The young man spoke quietly when the waitress approached. His voice carried strain. He ordered a basic breakfast, then hesitated and added, "Could you hold off on the bacon? Just the cheapest plate you got." The waitress nodded with a gentle understanding, but Frank saw the way the young man's fingers tapped nervously on the counter. Something was wrong. After a moment, the young trucker reached into his wallet and pulled out only a few crumpled bills. He stared at them a long moment, jaw tightening before tucking them away again with a sigh. Frank felt the pull in his chest. It was the same pull he had felt in that motel room outside Tucson. The feeling of falling and not knowing if you would ever land on your feet again. Frank listened quietly as the waitress set the plate down. She offered the young man a smile the kind women in diners had perfected after years of serving people who carried more on their shoulders than they let on. The young man lowered his head, murmuring thanks. Frank looked at his own half-finished breakfast, then at the young man who looked like he had slept in his truck and eaten little more than scraps for days. He knew what he had to do. Frank waited until the young man took the first bite of his meal. Hunger softened his features, the kind of hunger that came from long hours on the road with little money to spare. When the waitress walked past Frank's table with the checkbook tucked under her arm, he lifted a finger gently. "Can you add his bill to mine?" he asked quietly. The waitress paused, surprised for only a second before her eyes softened. "Of course. I figured you might." Frank smiled. "And could you do me one more favor? Do not tell him. Just leave this on the counter." He slid a small, folded napkin across the table. On it, in simple handwriting, were the words he wished someone had left for him during his lowest days. "We have all been there. Keep driving. F.S." The waitress tucked the napkin beside the register and nodded in approval. "That is a good thing you are doing." Frank shook his head gently. "Just passing it on." He finished his breakfast, paid the bill, added a little extra for the kindness the waitress carried so naturally, and headed for the door. The bell jingled softly as he stepped outside into the warm stretch of morning sunlight. He walked across the gravel lot toward his rig, the polished chrome reflecting the quiet street around him. He had just climbed into the driver's seat when the diner door flew open behind him. "Sir, hey, sir." The young man ran into the parking lot holding the napkin in one hand. His face was flushed with surprise and gratitude. Frank rolled down the window as the young man reached the side of the truck. "Did you do this?" he asked, breathless. Frank offered a small smile. "Breakfast tastes better when you do not have to worry about the bill." The young man swallowed hard. "I did not have enough this morning. I have been trying to make a delivery in Dallas, but things have been rough. I do not know how to thank you." Frank leaned an elbow on the window frame. "You just did. And you can do one more thing for me." "Anything," the young man said quickly. "Pass it on, son. That is all. When you see someone who needs a hand, you give it. No questions, no fuss. You just help them keep going." The young man stared at him, eyes wet, nodding slowly. "I will. I promise." Frank nodded back. "Safe roads." The young trucker stepped away, still staring at the blue rig, as though he had witnessed something rare and important. Frank started the engine, the familiar rumble filling the air. As he pulled out of the lot, he looked once in the mirror. The diner grew smaller behind him, but the memory stayed bright. A quiet act of kindness. A reminder that the road was not just miles. It was connection. It was carrying one another forward. The young man stood in the parking lot, clutching the napkin as Frank's rig rolled back onto the highway, heading west toward the long horizon. And kindness, once given, kept driving long after the truck was gone. 1 year can change a man, but sometimes it changes an entire family. For Frank Salazar, the year that followed the fire, the motel room, and the unexpected call from Keanu Reeves unfolded like a long sunrise. Slowly, softly lighting pieces of his life he once believed were gone forever. The disaster that had nearly ended his world became the moment that reshaped it. It began with a magazine cover. Frank never expected to see his own face printed beside Keanu's on the front page of a national publication. The photo captured them standing shoulder to shoulder beside the blue rig, both smiling the way men smiled when they shared more than a story, when they shared a purpose. The headline read, "Hope on Wheels: How One Actor and One Trucker Built a Lifeline for America's Drivers." Frank had stared at the magazine for a long time before he allowed himself to smile. Not out of pride, but out of gratitude. For years he had been invisible, another nameless driver keeping the country running from behind a windshield. Now he stood alongside someone who refused to let truckers stay unseen. Inside the article, reporters described his new role as a part-time mentor and logistics advisor for the Rolling Hope Project. He worked with dispatch centers, coordinated emergency funds for struggling drivers, and helped build systems to support families whose financial safety net had collapsed. He spoke at conferences and truck stops not as a celebrity, but as a man who understood the cost of survival. Frank did not let the attention change him. He still wore the same old boots. He still preferred diner coffee to anything fancy. But he carried himself differently now, straighter, lighter, like a man who had stopped bracing for the next heartbreak. Elena had changed too. Inspired by her father's journey, she launched a small nonprofit called Families on the Road. It provided school supplies, holiday support, and temporary assistance for truckers' spouses and children. Her kitchen table, once scattered with bills, became covered in donation forms and volunteer schedules. And every evening, she told Frank the same thing. "Dad, you started this. You showed me what a difference one helping hand can make." Frank always shook his head, but she never stopped saying it. Her pride in him was steady and bright, the kind of pride he had once feared he would never earn again. Frank still drove his rig because the road lived in his bloodstream. But now, he chose his routes. He picked hauls that allowed him to return home for every birthday, every school play, every important moment he used to miss. Some weeks he drove far. Other weeks he stayed close to Phoenix, parking the truck in Elena's driveway, where Sophia liked to pretend it was a castle just for her. On short trips, Sophia rode with him, her nose pressed to the window, her hands gripping the edges of her booster seat. "Tell me when we honk, Grandpa. You will hear it before I tell you, kiddo." He watched her glow with wonder every time. Frank kept a small collection of tokens on his dashboard, each one placed with careful intention. A photo of Elena holding newborn Sophia, a lucky silver coin he'd carried since his first solo run at 24. And right at the center, tucked into a narrow groove above the radio, was a handwritten note on cream-colored paper. 4 simple words in Keanu's unmistakable handwriting. "You kept America moving." Beneath it, written smaller, softer. "Now, let's keep each other going." Frank read it every morning before starting the engine, letting the words settle into his chest like a quiet promise. The message wasn't poetic, it wasn't dramatic, it was honest. One working man telling another that their stories mattered, their lives mattered, their struggles mattered, and that no one moved forward alone. A year ago, Frank had stood on the edge of ruin, staring at the smoking remains of the only life he'd ever known. Now he sat in a cab that smelled faintly of new leather and pine, a cab that had carried him across thousands of miles under brighter skies. The rig had become more than a truck. It had become a symbol of redemption, of second chances, of the kindness that had pulled him back from a place he feared he would never escape. Every week, messages arrived from truckers across the country. Some were men he'd met at rest stops, some were voices he'd only heard over the radio. Others were strangers who knew his story from news clips or Rolling Hope events. They asked for advice. They shared their fears. They told him about bills they couldn't pay, trucks on their last legs, marriages strained by distance and exhaustion. Frank answered every message he could, one at a time, always starting with the same words. "You're not alone out there." Sometimes he stayed on the phone with a driver for an hour, listening as they cried or confessed that they didn't know how much longer they could keep going. Sometimes he connected them with resources through Rolling Hope. Sometimes he mailed handwritten letters because not every trucker liked screens. Sometimes he simply listened. He didn't need titles or recognition. He just needed to make sure no one else felt the way he once had in that motel room outside Tucson, isolated, broken, forgotten. Life had come full circle in quiet, powerful ways. On Sunday afternoons, Elena hosted family dinners where laughter rose through the house like music. Sophia liked to climb onto Frank's lap and announce with absolute seriousness that she planned to be a trucker. Nurse superhero when she grew up. Frank always told her the same thing. "You can be anything you want, sweetheart. The world's wide open for you." At night, before heading home, Frank sometimes parked the rig at the edge of the desert just outside Phoenix. The sky there was enormous, painted with stars that shimmered like 1,000 distant headlights. He stood beside the truck, breathing in the warm air, listening to the low hum of the engine cooling. He thought about the fire that once stole everything, and about the man whose compassion had given it all back. A year later, the road no longer felt endless or lonely. It felt like home. The evening settled gently over the quiet Phoenix neighborhood as Frank stepped onto the porch, feeling the warm boards beneath his boots. The day had been long, but not the kind of long that drained him. It was the kind that felt full, meaningful, lived. Inside the house, dishes clattered softly as Elena finished cleaning up from dinner. Sophia's laughter drifted through the open window, bright and sweet, a sound that always tugged at something deep in Frank's chest. He eased himself into the old wooden chair beside the railing, the same chair he'd sat in countless times over the past year. Its creaks had become familiar, almost comforting. Moments later, Elena joined him carrying 2 glasses of iced tea. She handed him one before settling down beside him, folding her legs beneath her and pulling a light blanket over her lap. A minute later, Sophia padded out onto the porch in her pajamas, climbed onto Frank's knee, and rested her head on his chest. They watched the sunset together in an easy silence. Bands of orange and pink stretched across the sky, fading slowly into violet. The desert had a way of making sunsets feel endless. Frank had watched thousands of them from truck stops, rest areas, and lonely stretches of highway. But none of those sunsets felt like this one. None of them felt like home. Elena reached over and squeezed his arm. "You look peaceful, Dad. More peaceful than I've seen you in a long time." Frank nodded slowly. "Guess I am. Funny thing is, I didn't even realize how much weight I'd been carrying until it wasn't there anymore." Sophia lifted her head. "Grandpa, are you thinking about trucks again?" He chuckled softly and kissed the top of her hair. "Always, sweetheart. But I'm thinking about something else too. Something bigger." Elena rested her head on his shoulder the way she used to when she was a little girl and the world felt too big. "What's on your mind?" Frank took a long breath, letting it steady him. "A year ago I thought I lost everything. The fire, the debt, the motel, all of it. I thought that was the end of the road, and I've been driving long enough to know an ending when I see one." Elena turned toward him, listening closely as the last bit of sunlight slipped behind the mountains. Frank continued, "But I was wrong. I didn't lose everything. I just lost sight of where I was going. Sometimes that happens on the highway. You follow the line so long you forget to look up. Forget to notice the turns, the signs, the people willing to help you find your way." Sophia wriggled on his lap. "Who helped you?" "Grandpa." Frank looked down at her, his eyes soft. "A stranger, a good man, someone who didn't want anything back, someone who reminded me that even when life burns down around you, there's always another road waiting. You just need someone to point you toward it." Elena squeezed his hand. "You mean Keanu?" Frank nodded. "Yeah, him, but not just him. You, Sophia, Red, every trucker who commented on that post, every person who told me I wasn't alone. Kindness comes in a lot of shapes, and sometimes it shows up right when you think it never will again." The porch grew quieter as the night settled in. A warm breeze drifted through the yard, carrying the scent of desert sage. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked once, then fell silent. Frank felt the world slow around him, as if time itself understood the importance of this moment. He looked out toward the fading horizon. "I used to think strength meant doing everything on my own. Fixing every problem myself, carrying every burden without showing the cracks." He breathed in deeply, letting the truth rise. "But that night on the highway when the flames swallowed my rig, I realized something. No one gets through this life without help. Not truckers, not fathers, not anyone." Elena leaned closer. "You don't have to carry everything alone, Dad. Not anymore." Sophia curled against him, already starting to drift toward sleep. Frank brushed a strand of hair from her forehead. "You know what I learned out there," he said softly. "That the road doesn't end just because you can't see what's ahead. Sometimes it just turns, sometimes it breaks, and sometimes someone holds up a light so you can find your way again." Elena whispered, "He held up that light for you." "He did." Frank agreed. "And now I get to hold it up for others. That's the part I never expected. Losing everything didn't break me. It opened something, made room for a new life, a new purpose, made room for coming home." The porch light clicked on automatically, casting a warm glow over the three of them. Frank took another sip of iced tea, savoring the quiet. For the first time in years, he felt truly settled. Not because the road behind him was easy, not because the miles ahead would be simple, but because he finally understood what all those years had been leading him toward: family, purpose, a second chance. He looked at Elena and Sophia wrapped in the golden porch light and smiled. "I thought I lost everything," he said. "Turns out I just needed a little help finding the road again." Elena rested her head on his shoulder. "And you're never going to lose your way again. Not with us here." Frank nodded. "No, not with you here." The screen gently fades to black in the viewer's mind as a final message rises like slow-burning embers. If you've ever felt lost on life's highway, remember this. Sometimes a stranger's kindness is all it takes to find your way home. A soft pause follows, carrying the weight of the journey, before the closing message continues. If you believe in second chances and kindness, And in Keanu's quiet way of changing lives, make sure you subscribe and share this incredible story with someone who needs hope today. And for the comments, a question appears in the heart of the viewer's memory. Have you ever been helped by a stranger when you needed it most? Share your story below. Then the final invitation settles warmly. Who should Keanu help next? A single mom, a war veteran, a forgotten musician? Tell us in the comments.